Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Abram and Lot in our continuing study of the book of Genesis. We left off, Abram had gone down into Egypt with Sarai, his wife, with Lot, and remember he had gotten into that trouble of she's not my wife, she's my sister, and Sarai had been given back to Abram. They now return back to the land of Canaan. Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife, and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. So Lot's going to be a big part of this story, so he's mentioned here. Now, Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. Part of that had been just from accumulated wealth previously, but also the Pharaoh of Egypt had gifted him. And yet, remember, Lot is with him. And his increased wealth is going to be an issue now as Lot is with him. He went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. We're coming back into the land, the same place of worship, the same place of the altar, and that's how we're going to end the chapter as well, with another altar. And Abram's coming back into the land. He's calling upon the name of the Lord. But when you're calling on the name of the Lord, that's both worship, but that's also evangelistic, where other people are seeing him call upon the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. And the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. The land's not big enough for the both of them. And it's yes, because Abram has flocks and herds and tents, and Lot has flocks and herds and tents. Plus, remember, there's other people living in the land. The land isn't vacant. It's already well populated. And so you have Abram and Lot, and what's left of the land isn't big enough for the both of them. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanite, just in case we forgot, the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling then in the land. So it's a populated land, and now added to that is Abram and Lot, and it's not big enough to hold all of the mix. And what's more, Abram, who's been calling upon the name of the Lord, and I said that's not only worship, that's also evangelistic. Here they're hearing about God, and yet they're seeing these two representatives of God who are on the verge of coming into conflict. So verse 8, so Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers." Now, they're not literally brothers, but they're related, in other words. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right, or if to the right, then I will go to the left. So Abram says, look, let's separate. I'll let you choose. You go one way, I will go the other way. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This is what you're seeing here is a picture of the Jordan, the sort of the mid part of the Jordan River. It zigzags, but as it flows south toward the Dead Sea. Eventually you get to the place where, notice that zigzag part is in the upper part of our picture. Eventually it sort of straightens out, and you're seeing the Dead Sea in the south. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. But back in that day, it's not like this now. Back in that day, it was like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. And so Lot looks to the east, the south, the west, the north, and he looks down at this valley, and it looks like the best there is. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, from the upper Jordan all the way down to what today is the Dead Sea. And Lot journeyed eastward, and thus they separated from each other. So Lot takes what looks to him as the best part of the land. Abram now Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley, and moved his tents as far as Sodom. That's one of the cities. There's 5 cities of the plain down there, and one of those is Sodom. Verse 13, now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly, and sinners against the Lord. So Lot goes down. He's looking not at the spirituality of the land, but he's looking at the fertility of the land. He's more interested in the materialistic aspect than the spiritual aspect. Meanwhile, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see. Now remember, he had him look north, south, east, and west. And looking east, you would look down and see that Jordan Valley. And he says, look in every direction. That included, for all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. Now this is a promise, but it's a promise that at this time in history had as yet been unfulfilled, because there's other people living in the land. And God says, you don't worry about that. I will eventually give it to you, and I'm going to give it to you and to your descendants. So it's a promise, but it's a promise that thus far had been unfulfilled. So Abraham moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron. And we're going to pick up in the next chapter. He'll be there in Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord. So Abram had come back into the land. Now remember the altars. Abram had initially come into the land, had built an altar, had called upon the name of the Lord. He had moved further southward, had called upon the name of the Lord, built an altar. He'd gone down to Egypt, no altars in Egypt. He comes back into the land, the place of God's promise, and he had built an altar. He'd come back to the place of the altar, had called upon the name of the Lord, and now he comes down to Hebron. He built an altar to the Lord. Whenever we see Abram building an altar, that is a promise of both present worship, but also that he's looking toward the fulfillment of the promises that God has given. Hebrews chapter 13 reminds us that we have an altar. We have an altar that was in the form of a cross and a continuing place of worship because of that.